Good afternoon, Ames Chamber of Commerce members. This is Drew Camp, Director of Public Policy and Business Development for the Ames Chamber of Commerce. Here with you for your week 3 of the 2019 legislative session weekly legislative update. Good news, there has been some movement on some of the bills that we are monitoring and care a lot about down at the State House this week. That's always a good thing to see, that they're having some subcommittees in the House and the Senate, and some things are moving along leading up to that first funnel in the first week of March, where bills have to be out of committees in one chamber or the other. We're still a little ways from that, but it's always good to start seeing some activity on some pieces of legislation we care a lot about. A few of those that I want to touch on, there's about 7 of them that I really want to touch on today that we're kind of monitoring right now and seeing where they go. Some we're undecided on, some we're for, some we're against. I'll touch on that as we get into each individual piece. One of the first bills, actually the first bill I registered on this year for the 2019 legislative session, was a bill that involved the future repeal of tax credits without sunset dates. Think of the credit programs that we use within Iowa Economic Development Authority to help retain and attract new and existing businesses here in the Ames and Story County marketplace. Anytime we see a bill like that, we're going to be adamantly against it, and that's something we were with this bill, just because we know that it could hamper our capital investment and job creation here in the marketplace, and will never be for something along those lines. The second piece I wanted to touch on is there was another bill that really looked at the research activities tax credit. That's one of those that we hear a lot about all of the time because it's refundable, so there can be direct money given back to companies investing in research and innovation, in research development and innovation here in Iowa. That's something, as you can imagine, being the Tier 1 research institution community of the state, we use quite a bit. So that's something we really kind of dig our heels in, or are pretty adamant about protecting, as you would imagine. There's a bill that does look at messing with the refundability and the amount of tax credits for the research activities credit that can go out, and it would also be retroactive, which is always something we don't really like to see, because that obviously means you're impacting past agreements that were put in place for that. So we're obviously against that bill as well. There was another bill as well that deals with population growth, and that ties with our workforce development efforts. With the lowest unemployment rate as an MSA or metro statistical area in the country, that's something we're always going to be looking at, is how can we attract new population and new workers. So one of the things we had kind of looked at as an economic development community in the state going into the session was maybe we look at some other states of what they've done to try to attract workers. One example was Vermont, and they've done a piece where they're trying to incent remote workers to live in the state, and they're doing it through some tax credits and some, frankly, some grant funds. And right now, that's kind of what we're looking at doing. There's a bill going through the House right now, through the legislature right now, that gives grants out to those living in Iowa but are employed by out-of-state businesses. It would be called the New Worker Grant Fund. That's something we're monitoring. We're undecided on it at this point, but we are excited that they're actually talking about policies that may have some impact on bringing population here from out of state. Some other ways that we're looking at they could potentially do that. We haven't seen a bill to this end yet, but there are some ways where you could have some tax credits for student loans to help kind of lower the burden of that. And then there's also some pieces, whether it's home ownership, whatever it may be. There's pieces that we think with tax credits or anything along those lines could be beneficial to help attract population to the state of Iowa. We'll continue to monitor those as they come up at the legislative session. One other piece that we were advocating for in our priorities, it was one of our top 5 issues for priorities this year, was the funding of extension of funding for the 1-cent sales tax to the SAVE fund, or the Secure and Advanced Vision for Education fund. The school districts, as you can imagine, are very much in favor of that because it helps pay their infrastructure bills, and we are also in favor of that because it's a huge community amenity that we have in our institutions, our schools and our institutions, but then also it really improves the quality of life that we see throughout the community. So we're always going to stand by our school districts in that regard. When we look at that SAVE fund, we are registered for that bill. There's also a bill that would really benefit Iowa State largely, but also the University of Iowa, and it's based on the Bioscience-Based economic development economy, and then also the Bioscience Development Corporation, memberships of the Iowa Innovation Council at both Regent institutions of Iowa and Iowa State University. That's something we haven't registered for or against on. We're monitoring it right now. We're definitely interested in seeing something like that come up. It's something that Iowa Economic Development Authority currently houses, the Iowa Innovation Corporation, and it's something we are generally supportive, but we're just kind of waiting to see where the bill goes and where our partners come down on it, because we want to make sure we're advocating as in a unison and unified voice for issues such as that. But we are generally supportive, but right now we are registered as undecided on that bill. Another piece is there has been a bill that came up to fund the Iowa Water and Land Legacy, or the 3/8 sales penny for water quality and outdoor recreation. That's something we're monitoring as well, as we've done in all other sessions, because we know that's an important piece potentially if it was to move forward for conservation and water quality throughout the state, and also quality of life. There's also a bill to fund REAP, which is Recreational Enhancement and Protection. That's something that's really important for trails and conservation throughout the state as well. We're also monitoring that bill as well, because that's a really important piece that the city and the county have used to help with some conservation, parks, recreation kind of efforts that they do throughout their communities. And finally, there is a couple bills going through the House and Senate. They regard nuisance abatement. That's one that we're really kind of monitoring as well. That's something that's important for cities, counties, any governing body that has the authority to monitor nuisance properties. That's something that we're really kind of watching as well, because as a community that you want to have a very good looking housing stock, very good looking properties, that's something we're always going to make sure we're monitoring as well. So we're monitoring a bill that has to do with that. And there's also a housing revitalization assistance program within the Iowa Finance Authority, which is now overseen by Debbie Durham. That's something we're also monitoring as well, because once again, it kind of really deals with making sure we're having the best quality housing stock we can have, especially as we potentially try to see some of those houses that may be rentals or maybe need a little love and care kind of move back into that single family housing stock throughout the community, especially in a community like Ames, where housing, the market is extremely tight, as it is in a lot of other markets throughout the state. So those are some bills that we're currently monitoring right now. That list will only get longer as the session goes on, and those bills will continue to move further and further along in their committees and increase in importance as we try to get them over the finish line with the first and second funnels coming up here in March. So please come back next week and listen into a little bit more about some of the new policies that we'll be watching and advocating for at the Ames Chamber of Commerce. Thanks for joining us. Have a nice weekend.